Welcome back to another episode of A Gift from Adversity. My name is Juri. I'm your host. Thank you very much for tuning in. Today, we are recording the first episode of 2023 and Happy New Year. Before I introduce my guest tonight, I want to introduce my book, which is A Gift from Adversity by Juri. It's available on Amazon. The subtitle of this book is Overcoming Sexual Abuse, Domestic Violence, Bullying, and Homelessness. After I published this book, I got a lot of messages from people who shared their adversities. And last year, 2022, I felt very compelled to start a podcast platform where we can share adversity and also the tools that we use to overcome and the gift that came from it. I'm grateful for all the guests who came to this podcast so far from all over the world. Let's invite our guest today. Hello, Amaranthia and Claire. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi.
Hello, nice to be here.
Great. So can you tell our audience who you are, where you're coming in from, and also what you do, and if you have a website or social media?
You want me to?
You go ahead.
So yes, I'm Amaranthia Sepia, and
I'm Claire Jones.
Yeah, and so we are a mother-daughter team. We live with invisible disabilities, and so our work, Sister Creatives Rising, which is our Instagram, our website, is all about helping underrepresented women artists in the arts world of varying experiences, varying mediums, genres of art, and creating a virtual art show called Art and Mind, which is a virtual show that gives a platform to these artists and lets them tell their stories through video, through documentary. And so we did our first Art in Mind called Reflections of Women, Femmes, and Our Mental Health during COVID in 2021. And we use these shows to raise funds for Brain Arts, which is an organization in Boston that helps these communities. So we do this work together. We've been doing art since I was a little kid and since you were a child, and so it's something we share and separately and together. And with this project, we decided to come together.
Yeah, we live in New Hampshire, but all our work is done virtually and focusing on working with Brain Arts, and then our show actually goes national and international.
So your social media, your website, how can people find it?
So with our social media on Instagram, it's Sister Creatives Rising, at Sister Creatives Rising. Our website is the same thing, sistercreativesrising.com. And those are our two main social medias right now. But we're setting up to launch on Saturday.
Yeah.
And so we've been prepping to get out there and tell our story.
Yeah.
So thank you so much. So let's dive into our first question on this podcast, which is the adversity. So can you tell our audience what was your adversity?
Well, I'll go first because it started with me. Amaranthia's mom, and I was born and raised in Barbados in the Caribbean, and I was born into violent, domestic violence family. So I experienced childhood violence from the moment I was born, or my mom told me even within her womb. And so from very, very young, having that first experience, I always had this feeling that there was more, out there, that beyond all this violence that was happening, there was something better. So from very young, I remember the very, very first instance of domestic violence, I was about 4 or 5 years old. And my father, who was the aggressor, he was a notorious womanizer. And one day woke up, and, well, it was probably in the afternoon, and a baby was on my mother's doorstep. So my mom took that baby and she brought the baby in and came to find out that that was a child from another woman. And then we left. It got violent. He came home, and I can't remember what happened in that situation, but I know we were out. And my mom ran to a relative's home, and we stayed there. And then my dad came back and tried to pull my mom violently. I was sleeping, and but it was one of my first memories of the violence. I could hear him beating her outside, and all I could remember, one of the things I remember very vividly, is that I was in this darkened room, and there was candlelight, and there was also kerosene lamp. There was this strong smell of kerosene. There was no electricity, and I could hear my mother's screams and the blood's raining down on her. And I was about only 4 or 5 years old, but that remained very, very strong for me in my memory. And one thing that I remembered very vividly was the light being emitted from the candle or from the kerosene lamp. And somehow that light was very comforting for me. And so as I grew older and my dad would drag my mom back into the violence, and we got caught up in it, I would remember that moment and that light, and that would bring me comfort when it became violent. And as I grew into my preteens, the violence got worse, and my father put my brother out on the street from when he was 12 years old, and he was never able to come back. He later died at 32 years old from AIDS, being out on the street. And I dropped out of school when I was 15, but it was always my mission that one day I would somehow be able to help other women, that I would one day become a writer and be able to tell my story, share my story with the world, and I would help my mom and maybe other women as well. And so when I dropped out of high school, I didn't know how I was going to get back, but I was able to leave the island, and it took me many, many years. I became illegal at one point in the USA. Um, and during that time, I got my SATs and my GEDs during that time, because although I was illegal, I still wanted to, the mission of having a college education was big for me, and this mission of helping my mom back in Barbados. So that took me I finally got my illegal situation straightened out, and I got into college, and I got a scholarship to Mount Holyoke College. Someone saw me at my first college doing this work, talking about my true poetry, performing on stage and telling my story, and they recommended me to the Francis Perkins Scholarship Program at Mount Holyoke College, and I got in as a Francis Perkins Scholar, and there the journey began. I then decided that I was going to tell this story of this journey of this domestic, it started in domestic violence, and through that, telling that story for the 4 years at Mount Holyoke, I was able to do research, and that research led me to understanding that this was not something that just started with my dad. It was an intergenerational trauma that was passed down through generations and generations, and not only my family, but it's something to do with what happened with colonialism and all this. It was way, way bigger than me. And that was the beginning of me understanding that my dad was just a small pebble in this whole massive ripple that had happened of adversity. And so I did my research, and it was called a play called Shadows of Voodoo. It got many awards, and my project was called Shadows of Voodoo: Bridging Gaps in Past, Present, and Future. And then I graduated and did a play, and that was my whole project. And that play told my story about living under domestic violence and my brother dying with AIDS, and how traveling to West Africa, Senegal, West Africa, going back to the slave houses, helped me to reaffirm the importance of confronting intergenerational legacy of abuse. And so then I graduated, but then I met my husband. I got married and got pregnant with Amaranthia. And by that time, I was 36 years old. And I became a homemaker for 20 something years. And Amaranthia became was very ill. We lived in Tokyo, Japan for a short time, and when we came back, she got very sick, and she was bullied and everything. And so I couldn't do my work anymore. But I kept it in the forefront, and I would tell Amaranthi about what I wanted to do. And then through all that, more adversity happened. And then Amaranthia, she at 15 learned about art and decided that art and mind was what she was gonna start working on. It was an art and mind at that time. It was a project she called I'm Proud of Who I Am, and that's how we got to here.
Thank you very much. And Amaranthia, would you like to share your adversity?
Yeah, so my mom kind of laid the foundation. It basically started after we moved. Well, we moved to Japan in the early 2000s, and then so we moved there between 2004 and 2006. And so we came back to America, specifically Connecticut, in 2006, and that's where the adversity began. And what happened was that I went to international school in Japan. I went to Nishimashi, and I met kids from all over the world, and it was pretty accepting. And so we identify as we practice Japanese Buddhism. And so when we came back to America, we didn't really fit in because since we're African American, we're not Christian, we're Buddhist, and we lived in a place that wasn't that diverse. In Connecticut, I was one of the only Black kids in my school. And so going from this place that was extremely diverse to suddenly being one of the only Black kids, one of the only Black girls that had hair like mine, the bullying started immediately. And so it was also the switch of going from private school to a public school. That was also very confusing at the time. And so I wasn't used to American culture. And so I wasn't exhibiting what an American kid was supposed to act like. And so I was immediately brought into situations where I'm hearing slurs, I'm hearing the N-word, kids want to pull at my hair. Any other Black kids that were in the room thought I was not Black enough, so they would start bullying me. And then the white kids, they would bully me because of how I looked. So it was an ongoing cycle. And so it just kept getting worse and worse. And eventually, my dad was experiencing racism in the workplace, and he does IT work. And so that was very, very, he's again the only probably Black person in the room. And so he was experiencing racism at his job, and ultimately we had to move from Connecticut to New Hampshire to find another job. So we were relocated again, and we didn't know that New Hampshire was less than 2% Black. And so the issue that happened in Connecticut became much worse. My dad experiencing discrimination at his job became worse. People just started saying things to his face and saying, like, we've never had a Black manager, so we don't need to listen to you. So comments just like that. And for me, things like being pushed at the bus stop into the road, being called names and slurs, my hair being pulled still, things like that. And just constantly being singled out and treated like I was invisible, whether it was from students or from teachers. And so it just kept getting worse and worse. And as I went into 5th grade and was about to transition to middle school, the only thing I had was my art. And so the art that I used was just different kinds of comic art and cartoon drawings and paintings of nature and stuff like that. And I just kept creating, and it made me feel happy. And so my art teacher, discovered that I was doing this, and my mom also kind of shared what was going on with him, and he was like, you know what? I want to put on an art show for you. And so he created this art show at something called the town meeting, which is every Friday, the elementary school, all the kids would gather together, all the teachers would gather together, and they would have this meeting about, creativity and like what's going on in the school. And so for the first time, they had this little art show presentation, and so all of my work was shown, and basically, all these kids just started talking to me, and they were saying ooh and ah, and they're like amazed by it, and so it really shocked me. And so kids started talking to me more and more. But then, um, even though that gave me an inspiration of like, okay, I really want to pursue art. It's helping me in some way. And at that time, I didn't really understand how it was helping me. But once I went into middle school, the bullying got even crazier because puberty, everything, things are getting more complicated. Kids are finding their identities, and I was one of the few African American kids. I couldn't connect with, African kids, African Americans, um, even the international community. It wasn't able to find my space. And so I decided, you know what, let me create a project. And it was called Do You Know Who I Am? And it was a presentation. And we basically gave this presentation to kids to be able to tell who they are and say, hey, I'm a human too. Treat me with respect and kindness. I'll treat you with respect and kindness. And it went really well until certain teachers became very upset because the students were given this presentation to work with, but then the teachers were given this essay where I was telling my story and telling what I witnessed in the school, which is very well known for the bullying issues. And so the teachers became very upset, this particular set of teachers, and the isolation started up again. The kids stopped talking to me, the teachers stopped talking to me. And so in 2013, I had no choice but to become homeschooled online. And that's where my experiences with complex PTSD, panic disorder, agoraphobia, so having trouble going outside by myself, the trauma from the community basically made it hard for me to function since I was like 13, 14 years old. And so it just kind of kept moving from there, but that's kind of the foundation of like what happened in childhood and how, what I've been having to work through.
Thank you so much for sharing that, and I'm very sorry that happened to you. And both of you, thank you so much for sharing, and especially about domestic violence issues, and that I've experienced that from my father. And you are from a different country. I am from a different country, living in America, and then I'm um, really relatable that you lived in Japan, where I am from, and I just want to emphasize that a lot of women, especially who had witnessed domestic violence, really struggle in speaking out. I remember when I was 20 years old, I'm 46 right now. I came to America maybe 22, and I just even couldn't say a word about father. Like when people ask, like, what is your father do or anything, it was very, very shocking. And as far as bullying as well, I got bullied in Japan, in Tokyo, when I was working and in school as well. And it's just so hard. And regardless of race or not race, when you are getting bullied at school, you can't focus on studying, and you just um, don't know like what to do. And then it's just constant isolation, like you said, or constant bullying that really disables you to move forward. So I'm very, very sorry to hear those adversities.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I I feel like it does disable you. I mean, in so many ways, it has caused me to have an invisible disability, and because of what not only what my mom went through with domestic violence, but also what she had to go through with me
Mhm.
during the bullying, because she was also isolated and kind of just experienced it with me alongside
Yeah.
with the parents that were not disciplining their children and the teachers that were just excusing the behavior, because you had teachers that would witness it and be like, well, don't keep saying this because then I'm going to have to report it, and if I don't report it properly or something like that, I'm going to lose my job. And so because then what's going to happen, the parents come in, and a lot of times the parents don't want to address the problem and they start attacking the teacher, and then it becomes a whole cycle. And so these teachers were scared of losing their job, and so they would just keep quiet, ignore it. And so there was really no solution. And so the only, like, within the system, the only way was to find a way to get out.
Yeah.
And
And
yeah,
this is way before the pandemic that nobody knew about homeschooling and nobody knew about isolation because during the pandemic we all have to do that. But you said 2013, that's like way before the pandemic.
Yes,
yeah,
she started very early, and you needed to have a person who was at home. So fortunately, I was a stay-at-home mom, so I managed her whole 4 years. So by the time the pandemic hit, she was way ahead of everybody else.
yeah.
As far as home, she had graduated.
Yeah, I
But
graduated.
yeah,
I started online school, 8th grade, and then so that was like 2013, and then I graduated in 2018. So 2 years before the pandemic,
yeah,
and that was actually another struggle because I didn't get to meet a lot of kids
hmm
online because I think over 10, 20,000 of the kids that were in this online program were on it because of bullying and health issues. So most of the kids were just like me, and because of that, we didn't know how to socialize. We didn't know how to talk to each other.
hmm
The kids that were in the community were my bullies, a lot of them, or they were kind of uh, just allowing it to happen. No one would stand up for me. So if I met someone nice, if something happened, especially if it was race based, no one would say anything. So I didn't really have community, and so I just kept. Once I got to graduation, I finally met some kids who were going through the same thing, but still never really connected.
Yeah.
And I decided, you know what, I'm going to take a year, a little over a year of a gap year, and to heal and to figure things out. And then that didn't work out because the school wasn't a fit, because I still need to continue online school for my not only mental health issues but also chronic health issues that developed as well. And so
college.
so the colleges I was applying for art just weren't
They
accommodating
didn't
of
have
that.
many online colleges
Yeah.
at that time, but she did get into one of them.
Yes.
But then it didn't work out, and then the pandemic hit.
Yeah,
and then,
only like
yes,
what 3 months later after I decided I'm not gonna
yes,
go to college.
the pandemic hit, and we were like, okay, so what are we gonna do now? Because she didn't get into college, and so it was this major hole that opened up dealing with the pandemic
And
stuff.
dealing with the financial stuff that came
Yes.
with it as well. So being able to not go to college, even though it was online, it was a saving grace in the sense of like I didn't have to deal with student loans and stuff during such a crisis where people were losing their jobs. My dad lost his job because of the pandemic, and so at the same time I was struggling again of like, what am I supposed to do with my career now? I'm not able to make the connections, and so I had to get really creative. Both of us did.
Yeah, so that's when we decided we have to
Do
figure
something.
things out,
Yeah.
and not get so stressed out about what has already passed. and so we just kind of
questioned ourselves.
And went with the flow of the pandemic and just kind of tried not to get too anxious about it.
So before we moving on to the second question, I want to dissect a little bit more about the adversity part of it. So first of all, Claire, as somebody who was in Barbados witnessing this domestic violence, were you domestic violence victim as well? Were you like abused also? Were you beaten up or just your mom?
Oh no, it was all of us. The entire, especially me, because as I got, my father would come and go. He would come and go. He was there sometimes. He wasn't there. And then as I got older, I would throw my body between him and my mom. So then I took all the beatings, and so I got beat up really badly. And my brother, as I told you, got kicked out on the streets. And there was one time when it was so bad that there was one instance where it was so bad that um, my mom ran out of the house and left me with my dad, and he just beat me so terribly. I thought I was gonna die, and I was like in the fetal position. He was just kicking me all over, and it was really horrible. And my neighbor heard, came out, and she begged. She came and she begged him, "You don't do this to your daughter." And she begged him, and he finally let up, and I was able to run out, and I ran into the street, and that was the last, pretty much one of the last times that we lived with him. I think there might have been another time because my mom, he would come and attack her, and she would go back again. But by the time I got to be a teenager, um, I started then to act out in my own life, and he left me exposed because as I got older, I didn't have a father in the house, and it was just a mom, and everybody in the community knew about art issues and stuff, and so I became a target for people, for predators. So I was sexually molested, and you know, and I never was able to tell my mom about these things till I got to be an adult. And so I had a lot of issues that were going on. And so I don't know how I did it and how I got myself out of it, but I determined that I was going to get out of that, and I physically was able to get out and get to the US. And but when you are broken like that, you make so many bad decisions as a survivor. You're desperate, and you get into desperate situations. And so I got into relationships with men that would do the same thing to me, and the pattern kept going on, and the cycle kept going on. And that's what I'm talking about, the intergenerational legacy of abuse, how it can go on and on and on. And so, when my daughter was born, I just was very honest with her from the very beginning about, I talked to her and in age appropriate terms of how to take care of herself as a girl. And, I was very protective of her. And, I eventually began to worry that I was so protective of her that it caused her a little bit harm, but that was um, my own issue stemming from what happened to me, I kept seeing what happened to me, and I didn't want it to happen to her. So, yeah, so it definitely happened to me
And
manifested different ways.
Did you become ill physically? And then you mentioned like a chronic illness or like some illness. Would you talk about that?
Yeah,
it's both of us.
yeah. Well, it's I was I guess I was ill for a long time. I didn't know till I went to the doctor in 2015, and I was diagnosed with they said I had
It's called
the tennis. Yeah,
it's called monoclonal gammopathy, or
in 2015.
MGUS.
Mm-hmm.
And so 2 years after I became homeschooled, we learned that she had this health issue. which is a marker for something called a rare cancer called multiple myeloma, which I believe is a blood cancer.
Blood cancer.
And usually it appears in your 80s. So at the time she was like 53 or so.
Yeah,
or
I was in my 52.
early
early
50s. And
But,
so
yeah.
it was very scary because I saw this decline in her health. It was very rapid. And at the same time, I was going to see this naturopath.
I was taking care of her with her own health issues.
Yeah, because doctors weren't listening to me and they didn't care about what was happening with the bullying and how it was affecting my mental health and my physical health. I wasn't able to eat or digest food properly. I couldn't.
We had to give her like baby food from start.
Yeah.
Take everything out and start from scratch.
There was issues with my stomach, all kinds of stuff was going on, rashes. And so I went to this naturopath who's also a medical doctor. She studies both, Dr. Amanda. And she has Addison's disease. And she said, well, I think you're at risk of developing Addison's disease, which means you're not producing enough cortisol or very little to none. And so I was on the edge of that. And so she started setting me up to go to see endocrinologists, changing me to go see different and
she intervened with the school until it, she intervened.
Yeah. And so she got me set up with these different doctors, my new pediatrician. Now I see I've changed multiple over the years with general practitioners, but with endocrinologists as well. It's been a long journey. And so I still every year I have to get checked to see if I'm developing Addison's disease.
Yeah.
And also get my thyroid checked as well. Exactly. So I sometimes exhibit symptoms that can be a precursor to it's an immune disorder, autoimmune disorder. And so as I'm dealing with that, then again, you had then gotten diagnosed with MGUS or MGUS.
And then had to start going to every 3 months, going for tests, screenings with my blood to make sure that it wasn't spreading.
Because you had it's not a cancer.
It's like a protein, a special protein that is in your blood or something, and so they have to check it.
Yeah.
And then that's how they know. And so this went on and on until last year, when the pandemic happened, I couldn't go for my checks. I couldn't go, so I went from 2019 without any checks. And so when I finally
got health insurance,
I got health insurance and everything
last year,
and I started noticing that something was going on late in 2021, and I was slowing down. I was very tired, and
having mobility
issues, but it just gradually happened, and then around February or late February or so, it started worsening, and suddenly I couldn't eat anything that had citric acid in it. Citric acid is in almost everything, and something called histamines. It's in almost everything. So I couldn't eat barely anything. Every time I eat it, I would experience major pain.
And
breakouts, rashes, and everything. I didn't know what was going on. Hives. And then suddenly in the first week of March last year, I started to lose my mobility. And it just happened in over a period of 6 days. And my mobility started to go. And I was afraid of going to the doctor because I was like, I'm the first thing, I'm in this community that had caused so many issues for us there as a black family, and I was worried about, okay, there's all this stuff out there of how black people are treated when they go to the hospital and all this, we don't get the care. So I'm anxious about that and thinking about all that and thinking about, well, I'm the person who mostly takes care of Amaranthia. My husband is out working all the time, and I'm the person who runs the house and do everything. So that whole week, all that was going through my head. So the day then it actually happened, it was like 4 o'clock in the morning. The day before, leading up to that day, I'd fallen down And my cat, which is Amaranthia's
Emotional
emotional
support
support
animal.
animal, Mina, she's on our website. She saw when I fell, and I told her to go get Amaranthia, and she ran down the stairs and yelled for Amaranthia to come and get me, and it was Amaranthia got me. And then the next morning, I got up at 4 o'clock and to go to the bathroom, and I couldn't lift my leg. So I got a cane and I dragged it across the floor. It was dark. I didn't tell anybody anything. Halfway across the room, my bladder, you know, I just wet myself halfway across the floor. And I'm like, oh my God, something's going on. So I need to get to the toilet. So I dragged myself to the toilet and sat down. And I sat there from 4 o'clock to 7 o'clock because I was worried and anxious about how is everything gonna go if anything happens to me. And I didn't know I was losing my mobility. So I get up off the toilet around 7, fell to the floor, and that's when I realized I have to get help. So I yelled for Amma, and then it started. That's when the ambulance came, and they had to get me in a special chair, get me out of the house. I got to the hospital, and then a few hours later, I learned I had this massive growth on my spine, and I was losing mobility by the hour. And within a short time, they came and told me I had to go get emergency surgery. It was 50% of me getting out, being able to walk again,
Being paralyzed.
being paralyzed. And this was March last year. And so from March until October, I went through everything. I had surgeries. I had 4 transfusions. I had all this different surgeries and everything. And then I had to go into rehab because when I came out, I was able to make it through the surgery, luckily. And as soon they didn't expect that my legs would move, but as soon as I got out of the surgery, my legs began to move, and they were like, "How is this happening?" And immediately they said, "You have to get into rehab." They put me into rehab, and that started the ball rolling because once they saw that, they knew they had to jump on it really quickly, and so I started to recover from there. I had chemo and radiation and everything, and now I went into remission
Like 2 days before my birthday.
2 days before her birthday in October. But that was not expected. This is totally
1% chance.
1% chance of a person that had that kind of surgery to recover. And I'm now walking again pretty much without a cane.
That is so scary.
Mhm.
So both of you went through a lot of traumatic situations in different timings and in different ways, but then like you guys both are together sharing this experience. Let's move on to the second question now, which is the tools that you use to overcome. I know you had multiple layers of adversities and then so many things that happened, but how are you standing today? And also, this is a question that I really appreciate because each one of the guests so far shared so many unique tools that they use to overcome. This is not in the book. This is not online. This is a live interview that people need to understand the magnitude of adversities that you guys both went through are really crazy. And what do you think the tools that worked you the most that you can share with our audience? So maybe let's start with Claire.
Yes,
You want to start?
yes, I'll start.
Mhm.
Well, first and foremost, my practice of Buddhism. My practice of Buddhism is first and foremost. I, whenever anything happens to me, I mean, it's a consistent. It's just like the air I breathe. So when that happened to me, immediately when the ambulance came for me, I said, "Amaranthia, get me my beads and my prayer book," and that went with me to the hospital, and that went with me throughout. I did my chanting, my meditation, no matter what, and I just stayed focused on my prayers and my chanting, and Amaranthia did as well. And I had a little um, system when I learned about my first diagnosis of the cancer earlier, that
The marker for
the marker for the cancer. I created this practice, or this little 5-step practice that I would do called clarity, awareness, presence, acceptance, and gratitude. and I would run everything through clarity, awareness, presence, acceptance, and gratitude. Every problem, and I would say, am I clear? Am I aware? Am I present? And I would run it through like a cycle. Anything that came up, that. So I had clarity, awareness, presence, acceptance, and gratitude. My chanting and my prayers, and I also had Louise Hay, who is a she she is the founder of Hair House, but she's also a self-help guru, and she's passed now. But I used her aud- audiobook called
Heal your body.
Heal Your Body, and I took that with me with my headphones throughout my whole time at the hospital, and that was like it for me. I just did that, and those things that I mentioned, and just writing, started journaling on my LinkedIn, and saying exactly what was going on,
You're documenting
documenting
your
what
progress.
my progress. Yeah. So pretty much that's it. And I continue to do that now. And every day just being conscious, being in clarity, awareness, presence, acceptance, and gratitude.
I know that Louis Hay's book, interestingly, when I was taking a counseling, my counselor recommended me to read that
Yes.
book. So, and I'm aware that Buddhism part of it too. And then, because I was raised in Japan, and writing the journal, I think that can maybe give you a perspective. How about Amaranthia?
For me, as I said, like over the years, it's always been art. But after when the pandemic happened and I wasn't able to go to school, I just was like, how do I get through this? Because I had like severe artist block, and I just found a space where I was able to submit to a virtual art show called Artivism, and it was for Black artists, and what happened with Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, and basically we were creating a space for Black artists to tell their stories. And so I decided, you know what, I want to continue doing art shows.
Mm-hmm.
And so what helped me get through the bullying when I became homeschooled was turning that anti-bullying project, Do You Know Who I Am, into this moving art show project called I'm Proud of Who I Am. And that was my first series of activist art shows. That was a moving solo show that my mom and the artists that helped me in the community, one of the few people I was able to connect to in the community through a local art school I was going to. And so I'm Proud of Who I Am was just moving around and kind of semi telling my story. I wasn't able to fully tell the experience of racial trauma because of I felt that it would be too dangerous to really tell what happened because for my family, for my health.
Yeah.
And so I had to no choice but to censor my story a bit. And so when the pandemic hit in 2020, I was like, let me do these art shows again. And so I submitted to this art show by Artivism, and then I helped them create the show called This Is a Movement, Not a Moment, which was about going further into what was happening with Black artists and the Black Lives Matter movement and things like that. And so I just was like, I want to keep going. And so I kept joining these virtual shows. There was one with the Painted Brain that was about disabled artists who were isolated, called Discovering a Place for Us.
Mm-hmm.
Painted Brain is an organization in California,
Mm-hmm.
and they help disabled creatives. And so in the middle of that, before that, I was developing my own concept, which then became the show we talked about before, Art
Mm-hmm.
in Mind, and where we were decided we want to help women, creatives, women of color, women with disabilities, women from the LGBT community, and give them this platform to tell their stories through art and videoing themselves. And so when that happened, and we partnered with our friends at Brain Arts in Boston to raise money for them. It was such a healing experience because we had this reception and this long reception where these people just got to show their stories through this documentary we developed for them. And we raised $751 for the organization.
For our first show.
And that was, we've done some charity stuff before, selling art through the I'm Proud of Who I Am project. And so we realized, oh, this is like a transformation of like bringing the I'm Proud of Who I Am back through this project called Art in Mind, where we're now not censoring our stories, we're telling the truth of what happened.
Yeah.
And so shortly after that is when I started noticing
it connected.
Not only the connection, but also just the down, you just kept degrading,
Yeah.
like her
health.
Now we know it's neuropathy, but her mobility and stuff started having problems. And so when what happened in March of last year happened, I was already on the way of addressing my experiences with agoraphobia and panic disorder and my experiences in the community by finally finding a therapist who understood my experiences and was helping me virtually on how I can get past it, do exposure therapy. And I was on the way of doing that. And between 2015 and the last year, my mom was always giving me tools of like how I could be independent, how I can manage finances on my own, how I can take care of the house, how can I take care of myself. And so when she lost her mobility that day and was on the floor, I went into this mode of like, I know what to do. And I don't know how I did it, but I just went to this mode where I just gathered everything. I gathered her prayer book, I gathered her medicine, I called 911, I explained the situation to the firefighters. And
she couldn't talk on the phone before.
I couldn't talk on the phone before at all. And so all those moments that my mom kept being like, okay, this is what you need to do, a little bit of exposure to this, a little bit of exposure to that. Then finally finding that therapist, you know, a year before what happened, of just telling me this is what you need to do. But then when my mom was in the hospital and we're being told this is a serious cancer, this could be a sarcoma, this could be multiple myeloma. Now at what, 59 years old?
Yeah, 59.
We were like, this is insane. What? We've just gone through so much stuff. Like you said, it's been very crazy. And so I wasn't able to do my art at all because I had such a severe art block. I wasn't able to use that as my usual healing tool. The creativity was gone because I was so stressed, I was so depressed, because how they approached us is that it sounded like it was terminal. And so when she came out of the surgery and she started moving, they're like, wait a minute, you're not supposed to be moving like this. This is like the 1% chance of you moving your legs. It gave me hope of like, whatever was out there, the higher power is protecting us. And so I decided, okay, I have to keep going. And so I just kept motivating myself. I started documenting what was happening with my mom. I started sharing her story on my social media. And I realized I'm going to use this for the next Art in Mind and once she's recovered, because she will recover. That's why I kept telling myself, and we will tell her story. And then next thing you know, she's finally home. She has this car crash brace on. Because that was the only thing
I can't look up, down, left, or right for 8 weeks.
That was the only thing that she could wear to make sure her spine was okay for 8 weeks. And so when she came home, she was in this wheelchair with this brace on. And then we learned it wasn't multiple myeloma, it was lymphoma. It was a highly, highly treatable form of lymphoma. And so we then learned that the marker for multiple myeloma can also be a marker for lymphoma. And so all these symptoms she's had over the years turned out to be this lymphoma that was developing. And so she just kept shocking doctors. And then it kept giving me the confidence of like, I have to find a way to tell her story. And so now when she went into remission in October, 2 days before my birthday, October 19th, we decided, you know what, let's rest for a bit, but maybe we should bring back Art in Mind. And so in December, we started working on the Art in Mind project. And now we're in the middle of it calling it this next iteration, I Know Who I Am. which then connects back to I'm proud of who I am. Do you know who I am?
And connects back to my first project in college when I started, and I couldn't finish it.
Yes.
So we've come together now, and this is the major tool to get us forward.
To tell this story, to show this documentary about my mom,
and continue
to
healing.
find specifically other Black women who have gone through these medical crises and not felt listened to or felt scared to go to the doctor. And so we have found that working on this project, even though I'm not drawing as much as I used to, working on this other creative outlet has allowed us to work on our healing journey. It's been a major tool. I would say it's the biggest tool we've these
right
art
now.
shows have been the biggest tool in helping us heal.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that. So my last question for you is a gift that came from the adversity. So let's start with Claire. What would you say the gift that came from these adversities?
I would say the greatest gift is finding my true self. My middle name is Claire, and I use that now. I started using that when I was about 50 years old. I realized that whenever I use Claire, Claire means bright. And whenever I use that name, I don't feel that heaviness from my life, from my full name, that I carried that was with me when I was through all that trauma. My first name was where all the trauma seemed to settle. But when I used Claire, I felt like I had space, and I was this new person, the person I always wanted to be, the person that people never met, not the survivor, the person who was living, the person who was thriving. So Claire is the gift that I have from this adversity, the brightness of Claire and the full immersion of this side of me that I am now learning about, and that a lot of people never knew about, because I never knew that I had that within me, this power and this light within me to do, to feel good, to love myself, to care about myself. So the gifts of love, the gifts of self-confidence, and of just being born again, you know. And I'm gonna turn 60 on January 21st, and I feel it's a new beginning. Even though I've gone through all this stuff, I don't look back today to be a victim, or to be angry, or to feel regret. I look back to reflect, to understand how I got here, but I live my life mostly in the present, looking forward to the future. So I would say that that's the greatest gift, being present in my life and living as Claire.
Great.
Well,
thank you so much. How about Amaranthia?
For me, I think the greatest gift has been, I felt like last year was the first time I was able to challenge all of the health issues that I live with. And speaking to my doctors, my endocrinologist, my naturopath, my therapist, the one common denominator in all of those conversations is that you had a forced maturity. And all of them told me, you were already on your way. You were already using your art, these shows to help yourself heal and help yourself connect to others, and who are going through something similar, who are also going through this isolation with physical and invisible disabilities, and race issues and things like that. But when my mom had no choice but to be in that hospital, I had to be able to start, and I was very not well at the time, because I didn't realize what was happening to her before we really knew what was happening, was affecting me mentally and physically, my health. And so when she was in the hospital, I was like, just didn't know how to get out of that. And so it kind of made me have no choice but to be like, you know what, I need to, I was already stepping up, but I need to go the full mile. And so I just started challenging myself, like going outside of my house more,
Creating a garden so she could go outside.
Exactly. And I started, I would help her get to her appointments. Because of my health issues, I haven't been able to learn how to drive. But what I started doing was just self like advocating for her, advocating for me. Whenever we went out, making sure I was pushing her wheelchair, carrying all of her things, asking people for help if I needed it. Um, if she wasn't too exhausted or had brain fog from the treatment, I stood up and made sure that I told the doctors what was going on. And so the anxiety, the panic that I had and still have, it started lessening because I just learned how to stand up for myself. I learned how to advocate, and I learned how to face a lot of these traumas by going back into a community that I haven't really trusted. And I found that doing it in my own way, instead of having people, you need to do it this way, you need to do it in that way, because my disability is invisible, or disabilities are invisible. So a lot of people don't understand. And so I decided I have to do this in my own way and find the best ways for me to approach these things. And so, like my mom said before, I wouldn't be able to do phone calls. I wouldn't be able to do Zoom calls or be in a podcast like this. And so the growth I've had from such an unexpected thing, which really should have been expected because it was years and years of this emerging with my mother, I was able to step up to the moment. And I feel like if it didn't happen, the both of us, we wouldn't have been able to step up and start facing those traumas.
So whether it was
the traumas and the behaviors from the domestic violence, of being scared and feeling insecure and having this imposter syndrome, and with me of being like, I don't feel safe, and having these panic attacks, it's just forced us to face it. And so I feel like that's a real gift.
We've grown separately and together.
It was such a scary thing, but at the same time, it felt like a great thing for us to be like,
yes,
let's face everything all at once.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for sharing and coming to the podcast, A Gift from Adversity. I really appreciate you sharing your story in 2023. You're the first guest for 2023. So I truly appreciate it. So thank you everyone for listening to A Gift from Adversity. My name is Juri Love. We have more episodes coming up, and we'll see you next time.